Okay, hi. I did a project on historiography of Cleopatra, famed queen, famed beauty, famed, excuse my French, for of ancient Egypt and Rome and the Mediterranean world at large. So to get started, scroll down here. Let's begin with a brief rundown on the queen's life and reign. So Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE in Alexandria, Egypt. She was the eldest child and favorite child, I should mention, of her father, who was the pharaoh of Egypt at the time, Ptolemy II. So Ptolemy II had unfortunately incurred quite a lot of debt with the Romans and quite a lot of humiliation in Roman propaganda that was widespread at the time, leading him to take his own life when Cleopatra was only a teenager. So she became, at age 18, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. This dynasty dates back to the Greco-Macedonian line of Alexander the Great. During his conquests into the Middle East and the Eastern world from Macedonia, his family, the Ptolemaic line, had taken over rule in Egypt and for 300 years had ruled there over the native Egyptians, Cleopatra being the last of which. She, at age 18, became queen, sort of. So she aligned herself with Julius Caesar, as you may have heard, because that is a very, very famous historical affair that I'm sure we're all familiar with, against a civil war against her brother, husband, co-ruler. I know that sounds gross. Bear with me. History is gross. Ptolemy the 13th, who was her younger brother, who was about 10 years old at the time. And yes, they were officially married. No, don't worry, I don't believe it didn't last that long, because Ptolemy was killed at the Battle of the Nile, and when Caesar and Cleopatra's troops soundly defeated him, and thus Cleopatra became in charge. Caesar did eventually settle disputes, minor schisms between her and her second youngest brother, Ptolemy the 14th, who she did also officially marry and co-rule with, but he was a ruler in name alone. Cleopatra held the power. After Julius Caesar's death at the hands of his conspirators in 44, she allied herself then with Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man and another Roman general and politician. This was also another famed affair that fueled a lot of gossip and rumors of most of history, actually, Cleopatra being one of the most, if not the most, written about women in history. But things that people tend to overlook is that Cleopatra, as leader of Egypt, had a lot of moolah, which Mark Antony used to fund his invasions of the Parthian Empire and the Kingdom of Armenia at the time. Unfortunately, the couple fought against Caesar's successor Octavian in the final war of the Roman Republic, and they were soundly defeated at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. That is the battle that Antony, yes, they were defeated, they fled. Antony, believing false Roman propaganda that Cleopatra had taken her own life, then took his own life. Cleopatra, being separated from her companion and now realizing that if she were to be captured by the Romans, she would be paraded around in the city, and not wanting to be made into a trophy for them, decided to then take her own life as well. Now, there's a common myth that she snuck a snake into her chambers and was bitten by an asp. This is largely not believed to be true. What's more believed to be true by historians is that she actually used poison. So, all this talk about ancient Egypt. You know, you're probably thinking pyramids, camels, ooh, so exotic, so foreign and enchanting, right?
Wrong.
Wrong. You're very right, Damani. It's wrong. Edward Said would be so disappointed in all of you. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, but that, my dear classmates, is Orientalism at work. Now, I think we've all got a pretty fair grip on the concept itself, but just as a refresher, Orientalism is loosely defined as a system that depicts the Orient or East as diametrically opposed and therefore inherently inferior to the West. This is a concept that was originally developed by Edward Said, who is a post-colonial intellectual, in his 1978 book, Orientalism, as you can see there. But did you know that Orientalism in practice dates back to the Roman Empire itself? Of course you did, you're smart. So are these Roman sources. So we have Horace, Plutarch, and Cassius Dio are the ones that I decided on. There were a lot to pick from, but these are the ones I decided on. So these scholars and others of their time largely viewed Cleopatra as a power-hungry and dissolute and corrupted woman. Horace, in his epic poem Odes, which was a series of books published in multi-volumes, included in his poem 37 of his first book was called Nunc est bibendum, or which roughly translates to "Now is the time for drinking," which is a celebratory poem in which he commends the Roman patriarchs and Octavian and his countrymen of soundly defeating Cleopatra and the menace Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium. He compares Cleopatra to prey running away from the strong conquerors who will soon make a trophy out of her. Similarly to that, Plutarch and his parallel lives, or the lives of Romans, in specifically Life of Julius Caesar and Life of Marcus Antonius, who is Mark Antony, he also makes a mockery of Cleopatra, sort of on the other side, where he does acknowledge that she has some strong traits, shrewd, she conducts business shrewdly, that sort of thing. But he also then flips it to put the blame on her for sort of corrupting Caesar and Antony to bend to her will. So in that way, again, diametrically opposed to Horace, he does compare Cleopatra to a predator hunting prey. So kind of no matter which way you look at it, they're going to frame it so that it's the queen's fault herself. Cassius Dio was a historian who wrote a Roman history. He did not like this woman at all. He called her a woman of insatiable sexuality and insatiable avarice, which not a very nice thing to say about somebody. So, but then if we look in near the same time, as close as I could, because unfortunately, many of the Middle Eastern and Egyptian sources themselves were destroyed over the centuries as the Library of Alexandria was kind of left to crumble. So the earlier ones that I could find include John, who is a bishop of Nikiu from the 7th century, and Ibn Batri from the 10th century. I apologize for butchering those names. But the thing about the Eastern world is that they tended to view, or to at least more so than the Western world, link femininity with power. They saw women as fully capable in the sciences, in astronomy, in mathematics, in literature, in anything that we think women can do today. They were like, you know what? I'm on board with that, at least more so than the Romans and other parts of the Western world. So the very fact that a woman, so to the Romans, I should say, the very fact that a woman held the most powerful position in the state shocked them. And they attributed this fault to the backwards and strange exotic customs of the Middle East. Completely on the opposite side of that is John, Bishop of Nikiu, who praises Cleopatra as great in herself and in her achievements in courage and strength. There was none of the kings who preceded her who wrought such achievements as she. She executed works in vigilant care for the well-being of the city, and before she died, she executed many noble works and created important institutions. Ibn Battuta, similarly, she built many great buildings in Alexandria and many wonderful things. She introduced mosaic work and built an imposing temple called the Temple of Saturn. She built in the city of Ikhnim a hydrometer in order to keep under control the waters of the Nile of Egypt. She then built another nilometer in the town of Ancina. So, and this also just kind of gives a peek into John, Bishop of Nikiu himself being an Egyptian, more of what the Egyptians themselves viewed their previous queen as. And we get into the medieval and Romantic era. So we have Geoffrey Chaucer, who I'm sure you guys have heard of because he is the author of the Canterbury Tales. Lesser known, he made an epic collection of poems called The Legend of Good Women. And it is set up similarly to a legend, poetic legend that tells the lives of various saints. So he is comparing these epic women of history to saints, Cleopatra included. However, they're not saints who have died for the sake of any one god, but they have died for the god of love. So he kind of once more boils Cleopatra down to no more than a woman who was involved in two of the most famous affairs in history, not a woman who ruled in her own right. Then we have Giovanni Boccaccio. His most famous work, On Famous Women, summed up Cleopatra as a scheming, sensuous Jezebel figure. He called her the whore of the Eastern kings. He, while acknowledging that she was involved in these affairs, saw that as a bad thing. So, and this is Boccaccio, and that is Chaucer. So then we get more into the modern period, and we have subaltern studies and feminist studies in the contemporary era. Sorry, let me just, there we go. Starting with Mary Beard. Mary Beard is an English classicist, scholar, professor, and author. I'm sure you guys have come across her in your studies, maybe at one point or another. Very prolific author. But I used two of her sources: an article that she published in 2003 called Cleopatra from History to Myth, and a book called SPQR, which is a history of ancient Rome. She and the other contemporary authors I'll be talking about tried to separate myth from fact as much as they could. They tried to really just look at the facts of what Cleopatra's upbringing was like, how she was as a woman, how she did things, why she did the things that she did as an intelligent woman in and of herself. So Mary Beard quote that I love that she mentions when she's talking about the relationship between Antony and Cleopatra. Their relationship has forever been written up in erotic terms, whether hopeless infatuation on Antony's part or one of the greatest love stories in the history of the West. Passion may have been one element of it, but their partnership was underpinned by something more prosaic: military, political, and financial needs. So Antony was in need of military, political, and financial means, and Cleopatra could provide all of those, besides just a pretty face. Continuing with that, we have Joyce Tildesley, who is a British archaeologist, Egyptologist, author, and broadcaster. I used her book Cleopatra, Last Queen of Egypt, in which she kind of takes a similar stance to Beard and really tries to boil down Cleopatra as a woman and a ruler, as opposed to, once again, excuse my French, all four. So the quote that I loved that she included was, "These tales of seduction, intrigue, and suicide by asp," the tales spun by Romans and other, old Westerners, have obfuscated Cleopatra's true political genius. She views her, like I said, as a human being as well as a queen. And then we have Alberto Angela. This one is a bit funky. He is by trade a paleontologist in Italy, but he's also a journalist and a history and science writer. And I used the book Cleopatra, the Queen Who Challenged Rome and Conquered Eternity. This is its translated name. I'm not going to try to say it's Italian. But a quote that I pulled that I think really summarizes the stance and also my personal feelings about the Queen's just genius. "She would become a great stateswoman and strategist who would give Egypt a new lease on life and even bring it new lands and new wealth. As a matter of fact, thanks to Cleopatra's shrewd politics and her ability to ensnare first Caesar, then Antony, Egypt would gain control of practically every shore of the Eastern Mediterranean, from Turkey to Libya. It was an extraordinary result, owed strictly to her talent." So from there, a brief rundown on my contribution. I wanted to take more of a psychoanalytical approach to Cleopatra because I'm sure that her special upbringing affected her in some ways. I think personally that directly contributed to her effective role. So growing up in ancient times, there is a lot of desire for power, for the throne. You always hear tales of monarchy of people poisoning one another or imprisoning one another, trying to get hold of the throne. This was also something that happened in ancient Egypt. So she had dangerous relatives seething all around her. Over time, she developed nerves of steel from this. The forced marriage to siblings, which was not, I guess, so much forced marriage as it was an Egyptian custom at the time. Like I said, that would mess anyone up. And then the pressure from birth to keep Egypt productive and independent. To put it a little more colloquially, produced one intelligent, resourceful, unrelenting, feminine, badass. So here are just some different depictions of her because she has been depicted all sorts of ways throughout history. I mean, there's a famous movie with Elizabeth Taylor, there's famous art, there's a somewhat of like a facial reconstruction based on old coins and statues. And the thing is that none of that matters, really, because this woman spoke 9 languages fluently. She conducted business shrewdly. She kept Egypt productive and independent. She personally led armies, not just at the Battle of Actium, but during both Roman and Egyptian civil wars. She was a fully capable woman in her own right, but all that history and media tends to care about is her beauty, her sensuality, what she looked like. They couldn't handle the idea of a woman owning her femininity and also stepping up to the plate to lead her people into a more productive golden age. That's something we're still kind of dealing with. And I thought it was relatable, and I thought it would be a good sort of place to end. Also with a meme that I love, because that is everybody who's saying Cleopatra slept her way into the throne. But no, she was capable of commanding armies. And she was very well learned, well educated, and increased the economic and political stability of Egypt. So if you've got beef with Cleopatra, you've got beef with me. That's where I'm leaving this. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, hold on, wait.
Yeah.
So I wrote my question down.
Oh no.
So I might have like misunderstood you. So when she was fighting her brother, like he was still 10 years old.
He was, so yeah. So, okay. So the first brother was 12 years old when they were married. She was 18. I'm sorry?
Was he a Spartan? How was he out there fighting at 10 years old?
He was leading, he was the officer. He wasn't actually on the field, but he was commanding, he and his other chief advisors, it was like leadership. He wasn't actually like a soldier. They were leading soldiers as a 10 to 12-year-old.
Yes. I just want to know if he was really like 10 years old.
Yeah. And then her second brother, who she ended up marrying, actually passed away the same year as Caesar, just a few months later. So once after Caesar passed and everything became about Antony and Battle of Actium, he had already, he wasn't even alive. And then Antony had also killed off Cleopatra's hostile younger sister, Arsinoe, who had contributed forces to Ptolemy the 13th's troops, her little brother's troops. Yeah.
So in the situation that there's all of the children born are women, would they still force them to get married?
You're saying as an ancient Egyptian custom, if they're all women, would they force them to get married? I don't believe so.
Okay, because I didn't know she had a sister until you just said that. That's all.
She did have a sister. Yeah. She had 2 brothers and a sister. I think that's all.
When she committed suicide, didn't she commit suicide with a sister?
I didn't read that.
Okay. I might be making that up.
I read it. It was, she was like alone in her chamber. She had her servants. So her cosmetic routine is also something that's very interesting to me that I found out in this research. She bathed in donkey's milk. She had servants remove all her unwanted body hair and rub her skin with aloe vera leaves. So they did all that, and then they curled her hair and crimped it up and put oil of cinnamon in it, put her crown on her head, and then she laid on a couch. And in some, myths, she was bitten by an asp, or in, what likely probably happened for real is that she ingested poison and then just died on her couch. So as far as siblings being there, I didn't read that, but it's possible.
Maybe this was historical fiction, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. In one of the stories that I read, she decided to commit suicide to prevent her sister from being paraded with her through Rome. That's probably fiction.
Probably. At least in the research I did. Probably. But I'm not going to say for sure. I don't know.
And it was Arsinoe, right?
It was Arsinoe.
That's the same sister. Yeah.
Yes.
So probably.
There's actually a great drunk history segment on Arsinoe too, where she kicks Caesar's butt during that battle. Also, that I'm not gonna. I didn't want to mention it because I don't actually remember the particulars and I don't want to give you guys any false information. But I do remember at one point she physically cornered Julius Caesar up in a tower, and he had to jump out of the tower to get away from her and her troops. So that's the only part I do remember. But great drunk history segment. I highly recommend watching. Yes.
So how So I guess like a lot of your sources talk about like the myth to like the history and like the real person. So like, how do we know, what evidence do we have that like is strong to support that like she was like, I mean, like you can have evidence of her doing really cool stuff with like economics and politics and stuff like that, and evidence that she led troops and like she seems like a great woman person. And like I just like and I don't know anything about Cleopatra and I'm not trying to be a mean person, but like how do we know anything that is true?
So that's a good question, because a lot of the sources on her aren't necessarily the most reliable thing. I tried to find the best sources I could for the purpose of doing this. All the things that I have read that seem to be from a, more of a historically sound source than just like some guy posting conspiracy theories on a website, have generally agreed upon these are the concrete things that we know that she did do, kind of things. But I don't have them here.
We do have coins
And we do have
Right.
coins.
in her name, so at least we know she did exist.
She did contribute many volumes to the Library of Alexandria as well, but then unfortunately we all know it.
No, what?
Library of Alexandria.
Oh,
There was like thought that it like burned down, but what actually happened, I think, is that it just like kind of they stopped caring about it over centuries once Rome annexed Egypt fully. They're like, we don't care about. We're not going to read these scrolls, and then just over time and lots of conquests in the area,
I'm
it
so
just
sorry.
became dilapidated.
I'm so sorry. I was just joking. I know it.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. You got another explanation.
I thought I still live with you that burned down, so now I know the truth. There are more
That's like-
explanations.
Yeah, that's like the common thing. It's like, oh, the library burned, and oh, we would have been so technologically advanced by now if it had stayed, and blah blah. I've heard all those things, but I don't think you would.
Well, I don't think you would have been more technology advanced, but where did you hear that though? That it wasn't actually burned down. I'm curious. I actually didn't hear
Oh.
it either.
I've heard it a few different places, to be honest.
I've never heard that one before.
I don't know, I'll do some research. I'll find sources.
Is it the Romans that forged it? Is that like the?
The crazy one I heard is that aliens took it.
That's the one I know is not true, but I can tell you without.
Hold on, how do we know that?
I know that.
You don't have any proof to prove that it's not there.
We don't have proof to prove that it did happen.
You don't have
Exactly.
any proof that you're sitting in this room with other people.
Exactly.
Oh, don't get into this realist stuff right now. I'm gonna dip out. Also, Damani will be happy to know that my birthday happened over break, so I'm now a 24-year-old old woman.
Damn.
I knew you were gonna get me out of that.
It's like, happy birthday.
Let's make one. That's for me.
My birthday's on Wednesday and I'll
You're
be
not
52.
old. But you know what's funny? You're just a little bit older than my cooperating teacher. So I'm working with you old folks.
Yep. You're not allowed to do the name about your professor.
Yes, the hell I get.
Oh, you're gonna make whatever you want.
If my professor voluntarily offers up her age, she knows what she's getting herself into. So
Yeah, I do.
The whole thing where you like respect people, but okay.
this is mutual
That's
affection.
why I respect people.
You know, she my dog. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
Not something we would have said to one another in the 80s.
That's my.
You would have said each other's like radical or something. I
Look,
don't know what they say in the 80s. Radical?
you can't be open in the past.
I'm trying. Sorry, that might have just made you feel older than you are. That's all right.
Shut up here. Hold on.
So not so radical. I'm saying like radical slang like 80s.
Oh,
All right, guys.
see, I wasn't alive back then.
So next time we have Tyler
I wasn't alive
and
through the 80s.